to the Administration for Children and Families, or the ACF, within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there were nearly 678,000 cases of child abuse and neglect, and this was just for the federal fiscal year of 2018 alone. This means that about 9 out of 1,000 children are victims. Child abuse affects millions of children worldwide, regardless of your demographic, race, or religion. According to research conducted by Melissa Doak in 2011, final reported statistics of child abuse are greatly underestimated. This means that the true and accurate scope of child abuse may never be definitive. Because of my own personal experience, I want to shed light on child abuse and inform others that on something that we definitely know about but may not always want to think or talk about. Child abuse takes many different forms and impacts individuals as well as society in different ways. Today I will share with you different forms of child abuse, the long-term effects of the abuse, and risk factors. To start off, I'd like to inform you on some different forms of child abuse. Child abuse takes many different forms, some of the most well-known ones being physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, and neglect. Physical and sexual abuse towards children are some of the most heinous types of abuse or maltreatment. According to the World Health Organization, or the WHO, in 2016, 25% to 50% of all children worldwide have been physically abused. Physical abuse is when the abuser inflicts bodily harm to the child. Physical abuse, this includes but is not limited to beating, slapping, or burning the child with hot objects. Physical abuse may result in injuries, psychological damage, or in the worst case scenario, death. Sexual abuse occurs when the child is violated by the abuser in non-consensual sexual acts. Some forms may include groping, intercourse, rape, sodomy, or oral sex. A research article by Paul Amberson finds that females are more vulnerable to sexual victimization than are males, and are also significantly more likely to be sexually abused by strangers than their male counterparts. Because children are way too young to understand what sexual situations even are, there is no way they can give consent, meaning that, therefore, acts imposed on them by abusers are non-consensual. Psychological abuse and child neglect are both very common forms of abuse, although they may not be talked about as much. Emotional or psychological abuse occurs when the abuser negatively interferes with a child's mental health or social development. Psychological abuse can range from verbal insults to more extreme forms of manipulation of the child's worldview to benefit the abuser. Neglection of a child is generally a more noticeable form of abuse. According to Child Welfare Information Gateway, more children suffer from neglect than physical or sexual abuse combined. Neglect occurs when a parent or guardian fails to provide the child with basic necessities. And neglect tends to be a more noticeable form of abuse, as you can kind of see in a child, such as when they have unfit clothing for the weather, hunger, or being in an unclean state. Children who endure these forms of abuse may escape from the torment of their abusers. However, the long-term effects may stay with them for a lifetime and cause a lot of pain. Let's look into this. Those who have been abused may grow up with many psychological issues. According to New Directions in Child Abuse and Neglect Research, children who have experienced abuse and neglect are therefore at increased risk for a number of problematic developmental, health, and mental health outcomes. As victims grow up, they may experience some behavioral consequences such as substance abuse, violence, or early pregnancy. Victims may also battle mental health issues or personality disorders such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal tendencies, eating disorders, or anxiety disorders. Now, after my abuse, I went through some extreme depression and I had a lot of suicidal tendencies, and I'm very lucky to be alive today. And I'm one of the lucky ones, but many people are not that lucky. Moreover, those who were abused are unfortunately at risk of continuing the cycle of abuse themselves. Because victims are exposed to violence at such a young age while growing up, some may become the perpetrators of violence themselves in adulthood. According to an academic journal within the Journal of Family Violence, the cycle of violence theory emphasizes the carryover effects of witnessing and experiencing violence in childhood and later using such methods when interacting with others in adulthood. Older generations of those who were abused tend to be more prone to continuing the cycle of abuse. Sometimes when the topic of abuse comes up, older generations will be like, well, I didn't get abused, I got abused and I turned out fine, so it's okay to hit my child when they do something wrong because they'll turn out fine. However, they don't realize that there's some internalized problems that they haven't really brought to light. So sometimes it's a very tricky cycle to try to break out of. Although it's easy to blame the abuser for the acts they impose on their victims, the issue of conditions that lead to abuse is much more subtle and complex than we may think. So after learning about the probability of victims repeating the cycle of abuse, let's talk about some risk factors. Risk factors are characteristics of a child or caregiver that may increase the likelihood of child abuse. There are multiple familial and societal risk factors that are a cause of concern. Risk factors may include reasons such as drug or alcohol abuse on the part of the abuser. When the caretaker or the parent is abusing substances, their actions are most often unpredictable. You don't really know what they're going to do to your child or how they're going to act. So parental substance abuse may cause children to be neglected when their parents are under the influence. Other risk factors of abuse may be due to economical and psychological arguments. According to the Children's Bureau, poverty increases the risk of neglect by interacting with and worsening related risks like family stress, access to necessary resources, and the inability to provide care for children. Domestic violence may also play a factor with child neglect. When your parents are going or say, for example, if your father is abusing your mother is scared for her own life. So sometimes it's hard for her to think of you and your needs when she's trying to protect yourself. Moreover, psychological and mental health issues also play a huge role in risk factors. So when I was abused, my abuser was going through menopause. So after she went through that, she didn't really remember what she had done to me until, she remembers some parts of it, which is how she knew she abused me, but she didn't really remember it at that time. She didn't really recognize what she was going through. So health issues like that play a huge role in risk factors. As a review of the topic I discussed today, I will summarize the information I have shared. First, child abuse takes on many different forms. Secondly, children who endure these forms of abuse may grow up having to battle different psychological and mental health issues. Lastly, we talked about some risk factors that may increase the likelihood of child abuse. Child abuse impacts individuals as well as society in many significant ways. It is not an easy topic to discuss. However, knowing that it is okay to talk and learn about allows us to shed light on the issue and therefore find more solutions to prevent it. I hope with the information discussed today, you can earn a better understanding of the reality of child abuse as a multifaceted issue. Thank you.